God, thank you for being there for us. Thank you for providing for us. Thank you for leading and guiding us. So often it's hard for us to see your hand in our lives, to trust you in the storm, to keep moving forward in steadfast faithfulness. Give us your faithfulness to lead us. Amen. So one of Søren Kierkegaard's most famous writings meditates on this very scene in Genesis chapter 22. It's the sacrifice of Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac. The philosopher, he goes through the story again and again and again, thinking of it from different perspectives and vantage points. And he writes, once upon a time, there's a man who as a child had heard of this beautiful story about how God had tempted Abraham, how Abraham endured temptation, kept the faith, and a second time received again his son, contrary to any explanation. When the child became older, he read the same story again with great admiration, for life had separated what was united before. The older he became, the more frequently his mind reverted to this story. His enthusiasm about it became greater, although he was less and less able to understand it. How could a father sacrifice his son? As he grew, the story seemed more complicated. And the son, as he looks back and he thinks about what his father had done, Isaac, after he probably has sons of his own, could he have done the same thing Abraham had? I, for one, do not envy Abraham at all. Kierkegaard, he reflects that maybe it's in sorrow that Abraham rode his donkey to that mount, just wishing to be present there with God and his son. He sees Abraham as a man who's not a thinker. He was a believer. He didn't let his brain get in the way of his faith. They'd be known as the father of faith. And he possessed this faith even if no one else would see it. He carries his son Isaac to the altar in faith. Kierkegaard writes, they rode in silence for 3 days, and on the morning of the fourth day, Abraham, without saying a word, finally lifts up his eyes to the mountain. Perhaps he thought to himself, it would be better for my son to believe that I am a monster than for him to see that I have lost faith in the one who sent me to do this. Were Abraham's eyes darkened, void of joy, just full of sorrow? Or did they have this sort of unearthly glow as he moved in a surreal confidence, knowing this is what God has called him to do? That morning when Abraham prayed, did he throw down his face and weep in bitterness and cry in distress? Or did he bow in reverence, praying, knowing that God would still work through this too? That maybe he could even raise Isaac from the dead, even if he had to kill him. On the way to the mountain, do you think Abraham was restless or at peace? Did he dread this upcoming murder or find solace in a sort of consolation from God? The man of reason, Kierkegaard, as he writes about Abraham, he cannot comprehend the hero of the faith. The hero that the Apostle Paul points to as the example of living out one's faith. The father that James, the brother of Jesus, references where he says, this is what it looks like when your faith matches your deeds. The author of Hebrews uplifts Abraham and his life as a pinnacle of God's promise to us. Part of the beginning of the story of salvation. What type of faith does it take to kill the one through whom all nations are meant to be blessed? A miracle, a baby born for two old folks, Abram and Sarai. They couldn't even believe it. It was laughable to think that Isaac would even come into existence, and now He's meant to die. How could Abraham give up this boy who'd lead to descendants that outnumber the stars and the sand on the seashore? How's the blessing, this covenant, this promise of God going to work if Isaac is gone? But God had commanded him, which is contradictory to Abraham's own affection for his son and God's promise to bless him through that very son one day. It's a duty that Abraham carries out in silence. It's a burden on his own shoulders that he refuses to share with anyone else. He doesn't tell Sarah when he leaves what he's about to do. He doesn't tell Isaac until it's about time. He doesn't mention anything to the two servants who came with him. Just like a lamb walking to the slaughter, Abraham innocently walks forward in faith to his fate on the mount, believing that he might destroy his own family and his future and the hope for all humanity, but he trusts God even more than his doubt. He would go no matter the cost because that is faith. Even if he's afraid, even if he's trembling, Abraham faced all those painful emotions. He put them aside, willing to give up his only son in confidence that God would still somehow provide. Would we be able to do the same? Could we have a sort of faith that trusts in the Lord even when we know that life doesn't seem fair? Would we be willing to move forward, giving up all control so that his promise might be stronger than our bitterness and resentment? Could we move forward in confidence without resignation or doubt? Could God's promise be stronger than our despair? Even in our anxiety and our worries and our stress, understanding that the world might hate us for it, would we still trust in God's promise more than our own guilt or fear? Because God's faithfulness is stronger than all of those things. He is greater, and he always provides for the good of those who love him. At the end of this narrative, it's not Abraham who's called to sacrifice his son after all. No. It's God who chooses to sacrifice for us instead. He gives us his child, his future, his hope and joy. His baby is killed for us. This life and this promise, it's stronger than any bitterness we might have, contempt or despair. It's mightier than our guilt or our fear or our shame. God's gift to us, this once and for all final sacrifice, outweighs any sort of sacrifice we might do for him in our limited days. Even when the trials we face seem to contradict his love and the conviction we are given leads us to have a thick skin, we keep going anyway, moving forward in faith, trusting in him. God, you have been faithful to us, sacrificing your Son, Jesus, so that we might live. Help us to live lives willing to sacrifice in faith. Amen.